Hello and welcome to another informative VisFX Blender breakdown video. It has been a while, but I didn't disappear. I was just at school and things got pretty busy. You can actually check out some of my work on my YouTube channel that I did for school this quarter. So let's get started here. In the past, I have created sort of extensive behind the scenes of how I did the videos, and people want me to do tutorials. However, I'm not exactly a fan of step-by-step tutorials on doing things, because that just shows you one specific way of approaching the problem. It doesn't approach the problem of problem solving itself, because then people just learn the one way to approach things, and it keeps the user very closed-minded. I don't want people to just think there's one way to approach every problem. I want them to be able to think for themselves and solve problems creatively. As VisFX artists, we are creative problem solvers. We aren't followers, if you catch my drift. So instead of doing a tutorial, I sort of want to do an extensive behind-the-scenes lesson sort of thing, where I'll actually show you how I approached the problem, but it's not necessarily going to be a step-by-step tutorial on creating my one thing either. So hopefully this will turn out well. It's sort of an experimental style for these videos. Let me know what you think when it's over. Okay, jumping right in here, let's take a look at what we need to go over to explain and break down this water bending short. First of all, we need to cover the water manipulation, both in respects of the pond and of the water ball. So that's what we're going to go over first. Then after that, I want to talk about how I actually created the pond through a technique that's known as matte painting. Then after that, I want to talk about pre-multiplication, because what I realized is a lot of people actually don't know what pre-multiplication is. They just sort of know, hey, if I add this, it makes my edges look prettier sometimes. So I really want to go over what's happening when you pre-multiply something. And then I want to talk about the actual file. We'll break down the file and show you how I created the scene. So let's jump right into the water manipulation section of the video. To approach the pond initially, my first idea was, hey, let's use the water simulation and control objects. But then I decided that was going to get really complicated and really memory heavy really fast. So instead, I wanted to keep it simpler. Now, thankfully, just around this time, the new dynamic paint system got merged into Trunk. The developer was Micah H. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong probably, so I'm sorry if I butchered your name. But the dynamic paint is great. What it allows us to do is create waves very easily. So if we created a plane, this is how I approached the pond, by the way. I sort of shaped it as a pond. It wasn't just shaped as a plane, but for demonstration purposes, it doesn't really matter. And you need to subdivide it a lot. So then, this is unbelievably simple compared to creating this sort of effect using the fluid simulation. All you have to do is apply the dynamic paint and make it a canvas, and then change the surface type to waves. And we now have waves. Now if you animate it, you'll notice nothing happens. That's because we have no control objects yet. So how you add that is, say, add anything you want. We'll use a sphere. Actually, even better, we'll use Susanna here. We will use a monkey head as our wave object. So if we make this a dynamic paint object as well, but turn it into a brush, then we can drag her around and she causes waves to happen a little bit much, I'd say. Also, this isn't quite the effect we're going for, is it? I mean, we want a wave to push and pull out. We don't want just a collision object like, oh look, there's a splash. So how I then approached getting the wave to push and pull, I think we are going to have to use a sphere here, guys. The monkey head might be too complicated. So I approached that was I just took like a sphere and made it pretty wide and made it a dynamic paint object. And I changed it, rather than depth changed, I changed it to force. So now if I move it, and you'll notice it's literally pushing and pulling the water. In this sense, it's pushing it down and causing it to follow like that, which still isn't quite what I wanted. However, then if you take the factor and play with the value, like put it to negative, then you realize the water will literally take shape of the object. So now if I drag this around or animate it, I can say we'll insert a keyframe there, and then come over here, insert a keyframe. It's really hard to insert keyframes while it's playing. So insert a keyframe here, and then if we play back, you realize the water will literally follow the object. Like you can make waves just by having the water follow an object. It's so easy to get cool water effects, and you sacrifice it being 100% physically realistic, but using the dynamic paint system like this is a very, very simple and cool way to get water effects for anything. I am so happy that this was integrated. So that's essentially how I approached the pond. And I also had another object that was set to be a depth change or regular object, and I just sort of splashed it out at the same time the water came out to get sort of a splash effect when the water came out of the pond. So speaking of the water ball, let's look how I did that. I approached that, at first, again, I was going to try to use the water simulation. I actually did several experiments using fluid control objects, but I'm trying to mimic the show, not necessarily real life, and water drips all over the place, and you don't get the cool follow-through or lag effect of the water using the water control objects, no matter what settings you use. So I ended up simplifying it again to something that's a lot more controllable. I also tried particles, by the way. That didn't work out either because it's too uncontrollable with my current knowledge of those systems. So what I decided to do is use something simple and controllable, which would be metaballs. Now what's cool about metaballs is when you have multiple of them, they merge and morph together, just like fluid does. Like if you take water and put it near water, it sticks together. So that this is sort of the perfect object to simulate that. However, metaballs, you'll notice these are pretty low resolution. The first metaball object determines the resolution and the grid of the successive metaballs that you create afterwards. So if I just scale this down, you realize the resolution can get much higher, and you have a lot of control with metaballs. So low res, high res, very cool. So I don't animate the initial metaball. That's very important, because if I animate and scale this around, then things can just get to be a huge mess if I mess with the resolution and animate that. So I don't mess with that. Then I create another metaball that I animate. You animate one metaball. The whole method I used to get the lag was I wanted to animate one metaball, but I didn't want to animate 20 metaballs because that's just a pain, let's face it. Animating 20 objects is a lot less fun than animating one object. So what you can do is animate the one object, and rather than animating the successive objects, you can just copy the animation and offset it by a little bit, by a little bit, by a little bit more, by a little bit more, etc., 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 and you get a really cool trail effect. I did mean to say tail trail, by the way. I didn't say tail meaning to say trail, and then you get the point. So, looking at how I did this, it's very easy to do that. It's the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid, in its best, simplest form. Literally, I just take it, I animate it. We don't even need rotation or scale keyframes, we just need location keyframes. Go forward about, let's say, 10 frames. Come up here, we'll insert a location keyframe. Come down here, we'll insert a location keyframe. Come down here, we'll insert a location keyframe. I did location scale there. Insert location. Haha. So, let's make sure I didn't insert any scale keyframes earlier by accident. Yes, we only have location keyframes, because we're going to change the size of our tail. So the metaball animates. It's not exactly a beautiful animation because I just spent like 5 seconds on it. But then what we can do is copy the metaball with Shift D, the copy shortcut. If you didn't know, you probably should. And then we can scale it down. And then if we play the animation, you'll notice it follows exactly. But then what we can do is say take the metaball to animation and set it off by a frame. And we instantly have a cool trailing effect. However, you might see a problem already starting to form. If we take a third one and make it even smaller, like so, and make its own animation, you need to make the single object animation, by the way, or else the other objects will copy animation. And then if we offset this guy's animation by 1 frame, like so, then you realize that it's too much. It's too much at sometimes. So you'll notice that Blender snaps to individual frames. However, you don't have to. If you hold Control, you can put keyframes in between keyframes. So right now it's off too much, but if you pay attention right here while I move the keyframe, holding down Control, we can make it move by less than a keyframe. I think each of my metaballs were offset by 0.25 of a keyframe, so about 1/4 of a keyframe. So now the trail effect is a lot higher resolution, I guess you could say. So we could take a metaball sort of a little bit bigger than the second one and offset this guy's animation less than the second one. And we get a much cooler looking, smoother trail. So I did that about 20 times. I'm not going to do that in this video just because I don't want to waste your time. But that's how I approached the water ball. So then also you'll notice when she is holding the water ball like in the middle of the air and it's not really trailing around, you'll notice that the water ball sort of randomly animates like it's a glob and it's like pushing and pulling. How I approached that random movement is another very easy feature in Blender. If we just select our balls here, and we'll just do one at a time. Let's select the biggest one first, just so you can see what the effect is. I used the modifiers for the curves. So if I select the location, I can add noise. Noise is like a smooth version of random variation. So you can add some noise to this, and that's going to animate a little bit too much. You'll notice it's pretty twitchy, but you can change the scaling of the noise. And now we get some pretty smooth random movement. So then if we take this, copy it, and paste it on all of the axes, then you get some nice random movement at the end here. But then it's just going to move in a diagonal line because they're all exactly the same, changing values at the exact same time. So what you have to do is then offset the phase. So you get a random phase of the noise, and you get some cool random movement for your water. Now it looks even cooler when you do this to all of these. You can just paste the modifiers and change the phase for these as well. So you get some really cool random noise variation on your water balls, and it's a very easy thing to accomplish. So if we animate now, right now you can imagine we have 20 different balls of slightly different sizes all doing the random variation. You get a really cool warping effect of the water. So that's how I approached that. Now the material of the water is very straightforward. I literally just gave it some reflection, turned the reflection. I think the reflection was all the way up, and I just gave it some Fresnel so it only reflected around the edges like real water. These are not the exact values that I used, by the way. We can look at those later in the actual file. And then I added some refractiveness with ray trace transparency. Transparency almost all the way down, turn the Fresnel up there. Cool story. And then the index of refraction for water is 1.333 to get realistic water refractions. And that's essentially how I did the water material. How I found the index of refraction values is literally just typed IOR values into Google, and you'll get charts and charts and charts of these things. I think the first one that pops up actually leads to the Blender artist forums, which is kind of cool. Oh, one more thing that I did with the water is I used a Wordleso. I still don't know how to pronounce that. A Wordleso? I don't know, specular model, because water is pretty shiny, and then I played with the intensity and the slope of that to get it until it looked like water. So that's pretty much how I approached the water. Let's move along. The next item on our list is matte painting. So Before I show you how I used matte painting, I want to sort of explain what it is and where it comes from. So back in the old days, before we had all of this newfangled technology, matte painting was used to add in backgrounds that were not actually possible. Backgrounds or even foreground elements where the actors didn't interact with. So how matte painting works, I don't actually have a camera or a giant sheet of glass right now to demonstrate, but the idea behind matte painting was having the camera set up somewhere, like let's say right here, and then they would put a large sheet of glass in front of the camera. So pretend this is a large sheet of glass. We can use our imaginations here. So we have this sheet of glass in front of the camera, and then we have the background back there. So the matte painters would literally paint directly onto the glass in areas where the actors wouldn't be interacting with. So they could literally paint in backgrounds into the sets without having to build set elements. It was a very inexpensive way, inexpensive, not expensive, I sort of separated the in and the expensive. It was a very inexpensive way to sort of add background or foreground elements to footage without having to actually make them. So now how did I use matte painting concepts with this? Well, matte painting these days is all done digitally and integrated, and we have green screening and all of these cool ways to matte things out that the actors can actually interact with matte painted areas, potentially, or go in front of them at least, unlike they could in the past. So how I used matte painting was to add the pond. Essentially what I had is I took the image, the plate that we were using, this was where the pond needed to be. So I took that into Photoshop and took a blank slate like this and just sort of painted in a pond until it looked natural. You'll notice, you actually see the brush strokes, I sort of painted it in. I don't have a tablet either, so you can imagine how tedious that kind of got. But then when I played it back, I realized you can't see through the water. I didn't have the water clear, and people complained that it looked like mercury, so I had to add a pond base, so I added this. But then I also wanted grass in front of the pond, so I have like a layer of grass that I composited above the pond CG element to get little grass sticking up. So that is how I used matte painting and incorporated it in the footage. Literally, I composited this over the image for the background plate, and then composited the water on a layer, say, in between that in the Blender Compositor, which I'll show you when we actually get to that file. And then above that was the foreground grass. And then I had some other elements as well, like for instance, I had this grass, this little piece of grass that went in front of the snowman, that I also composited in front of him, which is also sort of considered matte painting, I guess. But that's essentially how I added the pond into the footage. I'll go more in depth of how I got proper reflections and such when we actually get into the file. Next, I wanted to talk about pre-multiplication, because a lot of people know that, oh, if I take this pre-multiply or alpha convert node and put it in between here, it makes my edges have no artifacts and it looks pretty. But a lot of people don't actually know why or what it's doing, and the problem with not knowing what it's doing behind the scenes is if you're completely ignorant to what the node is doing, you can really, really mess things up really easily. So I just want to sort of explain what pre-multiplication actually does. So I've made a little example here in the Blender Compositor. I have this fancy image that we're going to use as our foreground plate. It is these green circles here. So we'll add a viewer so we can view those. We'll use a backdrop and enable transparency. So we have these great transparent circles that we want to put over this super awesome sky image that I also threw together. And we'll take that and we'll sort of darken it, because Blender can do that, no need to do that in Photoshop. And then you'll notice that we should, in theory, be able to take this transparent image and just say, put it over the sky by the alpha channel, right? So if we take it and put it over, whoa, what is that? I mean, that's not what we want, is it? We just want a super realistic green circle over sky effect, right? So what you have to do then is pre-multiply it. So if we go to converter, alpha convert, and we convert it to a pre-multiplied image, then it just works. But what is the pre-multiply node actually doing? Well, Blender is hiding something from you here because I did this. It's not actually hiding it. I was hiding it for now. What this image actually looks like, because it's straight alpha, is this. All of the pixels of the transparent circles are a value of 1 green, 0 red, and a little bit of blue, I think. So literally, it's just straight green being put over by the factor of the alpha channel, which creates some weird results using the alpha over algorithm without the pre-multiply. So when you pre-multiply it, what you do is that the pre-multiply node is literally taking the image, this ugly looking blocky image, and it is multiplying it, we can do that with a mix node, by the alpha channel, like so. So now we get an image that looks like this, and then if we take it and alpha this over the background, it looks proper. So this alpha convert key to premul is exactly the same as multiplying by the alpha channel, because of the way the alpha over algorithms work. If we got rid of this, for instance, it would look bad again. So that's literally all it's doing. It's taking this image, something like this, and turning it into that. So it will alpha over properly. That is all pre-multiplication is doing. So if you, for instance, if we pre-multiplied more than once, which happens a lot if you don't know what you're doing in the pipeline, this can happen a lot, you get a really ugly dark edge around things, and a lot of people accidentally pre-multiply twice or 3 times in their node pipeline without even realizing it, because they might already have the element pre-multiplied and then they pre-multiply it again because, oh, it'll give me pretty edges, when they don't actually need to pre-multiply it. So hopefully with this knowledge you will do more good than evil, and you'll know when to pre-multiply and when not to pre-multiply. In Blender, you can actually output your images as pre-multiplied by default by going under shading, and rather than alpha sky, you can change to alpha pre-multiplied, or alpha straight alpha if you want to have straight alpha as well. The math, if you look at it with the colors, is literally the 1 green, the 1 green, the 1 green multiplied by the alpha channel, which the alpha channel is, let's say, 1 is white and 0 is black. So if we multiply the green by the black, we get black because 1 times 0 is 0, black. Well, if we multiply it by 1, 1 times 0 is 1, white. If we multiply it by gray, like 1 times 0.5, we get 0.5, which is why it gives us this. That's how the pixel math is working when you're multiplying stuff, by the way. So generally, for compositing, you probably want to output your CG elements as pre-multiplied by default. So hopefully that knowledge helps you out in the long run, and I hope that was informative. But now let's actually delve into the file. This is what the scene looks like. It's kind of funny to think that this actually looks pretty decent when all rendered and composited. We have this split up into several render layers, 4 to be precise, and I'm not using the 4th one, so it's really like a tricky 3 render layers, so we're just going to ignore the 4th one for now. The first render layer is the water, and it's pretty much just the water and the snowman elements that are animated, as we previously explained, and it has some lights to light it, obviously. Then the second render layer is the background plate for the water to refract. And I have the background plate split up into 2 planes, one close up, one far back. The close up is so when the water's in front of her, it refracts like she's close to the water. The far back one is because I don't want it to collide with the pond like this, because that would just be bad news when I rendered it out. So then the textures are projected onto the plane, so the textures stay stationary as the plane moves using the UV project modifier, which essentially projects UV coordinates from the camera based on the aspect ratio that you feed it. I fed it the size of my composition, 1280 by 720. And then you'll notice when I move this around, again, the image stays stationary compared to the object. I did that for both. That way it appears seamless because it's projected just like light is from a projector. I mean, literally picture the camera as a projector projecting the textures onto the objects. And I used the UV project node again on the pond. I projected the grass texture onto this, and then these grass pieces that are sticking up onto this plane right here. This was a fix I applied for the reflections in the water. I was getting some really strange curved over reflections. First of all, it was reflecting stuff that was too far back, so I had to project the texture onto this and move this far back so it would reflect as though it was far back. And then I added the grass here so the grass would reflect straight down into the water. So when all rendered out, this render layer looks like... Let's get this up here. It looks like this. So it's all nice and rendered along there. Now the lighting of the scene was just using some general outdoor lighting to match the scene. You really have to do lights to match your own scene. And then I had a neat mirror ball image, an HDR image that I used for reflections. I mapped it to the sky as an Eng map, so it would reflect on the water. I can show you that right now. See, I have it set to a texture on the sky, like so. And I have it mapped as an Eng map, so it will do everything properly. And I originally was trying to use the sky texture as environmental lighting, but that just took way too long on top of all of the ray tracing. So I decided not to do that. Now moving on to compositing, none of this was actually used for the final. This is just a mess of nodes I was using for testing in the scene, and then I used it to export the individual elements as image sequences so I could use them to composite later in subsequent scenes. So let's take a look at the snowman scene. By the way, the water had two materials applied to it. I had both the regular material, the water material, and a snow material. That way I could render them out separately and put those two sequences together, like fade between the water sequence and the snow sequence to make it turn into the snowman. So, let's look at this thing from the beginning. It looks pretty complicated as well, but not nearly as messy as the other one. We start out with the background plate here. I actually had this more organized, but then Blender crashed on me while I was recording. So we have our background plate, and then we take this guy, and we want to alpha over it on the background. However, I have to do this magic thing here, because if we don't have these nodes, you're going to notice some serious outline artifacts. So what this is first of all, I'm separating the R, G, and B channels of this, and the alpha as well. So then I can take the alpha and I can change it using dilate and erode. So I can either make it wider or smaller, or as I had it at -1. And that helps to eliminate some of the outline. And then we pre-multiply it to eliminate the other artifacts. But again, without the eroding of it, there's a slight dark outline right there. So you have to erode it. And then I took these elements that were combined together, and you notice this edge looks absolutely disgusting. I'm gonna full screen this here. So you notice this edge looks absolutely disgusting. So then I took our matte painting, which it was straight alpha, as you can see. So I took it, scaled it down, and pre-multiplied it to make it not straight alpha, and then alphaed that over the background. So we went from this to this in that step. And then we took this and we alphaed the snowman over it, like so. Now the snowman, we did some interesting things with the edges, but I'll show you that a little bit later on here. And then on top of that, we took this. Wait, before we did that, we took this, which is the grass, and we alphaed that over the snowman. And you can actually pre-multiply within the alpha over node. I'm kind of inconsistent on whether I do that or not. I should really try to hold the consistency so other people can read my files better. And then I took the shadow, it's a snowman shadow, and I alphaed that over. So if you pay attention right here, it's literally just a small amount of occlusion. What the shadow looks like is this. But then alphaed over, like if it's alphaed over on nothing, it looks just like that, kind of dark. Actually, a better way to show you that would just be showing with transparent background. So with the alpha, it looks like that. And I'm alphaing it over onto the snowman. So now some interesting things we did to the snowman. We alphaed him over. You will notice that if we have this set to standard, that you get these weird artifacts. That's because I took an image of snow and I plugged it over the snowman render. The original snowman render just looked like this. It doesn't really look like snow. And then when I do all of these things, taking it and overlaying this, we get a much more snowy looking snowman. It's kind of cool. And then we also have some rough edges that we don't have in the original snowman. You notice these edges are super smooth, but snow edges in real life are getting pretty snowy because most people don't build perfect snowmen. But I didn't have access to edge roughening tools in Blender during the modeling phase because I had to model it using the metaballs. So in compositing in Blender, here's how I approached that. We did some fancy edge tweaking magic. We took the original matte and I made it slightly smaller. You can see between that it goes slightly down. Then I took that matte, then I took the original matte again, and I took this snow image. I scaled it down to fit the snowman a little bit better. I took it down, desaturated it, it's no longer blue. I then upped the contrast a lot, and I multiplied it over the original snowman matte. So we have this chunky looking thing, which if this was our matte, this would not work very well. But then we took this guy and we screened the original but shrunken matte from the Dilate Erode node on top of it, and that gives us some really nice rough edges. And it really pays off. Like that's a lot of work to get just some slight rough edges in the footage, but if you look at this, it really kind of helps a lot. At least that's a lot in my mind, I guess. I guess a lot is relative. So that's pretty much how I composited the snowman. Looking at how I did the water, I have to show you, this is so cool. Looking at the water scene, we have some roto masks. So how you can actually do masks in Blender, which Blender definitely needs an overhaul on its masking thing. But going to the user preferences, you can go to the add-ons and enable, please don't crash, Roto Bezier right here. And what that enables you to do is, let's start this on a new layer. We can add a Bezier curve. We will make you 2D, and we will close you. Using the Roto Bezier tools, we can fill it with either a white matte or a black matte, which essentially just takes care of the materials for us. And then we can say, come over here, select all of the points and hit Insert Keyframe, then go forward. We can move the points around, mess with them, and insert another keyframe, and it will literally animate the points. That's what the Roto Bezier allows you to do. So doing that, I was able to create masks for the hands. So the hands could go in front of the water. Let me find a good example of that. Like right here, you'll notice the arm goes in front of the water. Like at full speed, that looks a lot better, by the way. But if you get up close, it looks kind of janky, I guess, would be a good word for that. But how I first said is I took this matte, the rotos, I animated them only in areas where a hand was going over the water, and then I put those in front of a solid white plane. So I rendered it out, and it ends up looking like this. We have a solid white thing. Then I can take this, and we have our alpha matte for the water, so I can mix these two mattes using a multiply. So now, when I use this as the alpha channel for our water, we end up with her arm being in front of the water, which is really cool way to approach things. I mean, masking is absolutely necessary in compositing. It is one of those absolutely mandatory things, and I'm glad Blender can do it. It does need a massive overhaul and improvement, which hopefully they'll do in the Mango project. And how I replaced the water's alpha mask with this is I rendered out the alpha matte separately and separated out the RGBA channels, and then when I combined them again, I just used my alpha channel as opposed to the water's alpha channel. Then pre-multiplied it and put it over. So that's how I approached putting the hands in front of things. I mean, if you render out or have your alpha masks separate, you can accomplish so much in compositing. Like it goes to show with the snowman, it goes to show with this. Um, just through tweaking mats, you can get a lot of really neat effects in compositing. I can't reiterate enough how awesome getting creative with your mats can be. So that pretty much sums down the breakdown. Sums up, not sums down. Who says sums down? That pretty much sums up the breakdown video. I hope you learned something, and I hope this ended up being informative. And again, I apologize for it taking so long, but I have been a very busy man lately. The next video that I'm going to do is compositing a cycles object into real life, which is going to be a challenge because there's no shadow only material yet. So stay tuned for that one in the weeks to come. Other than that, feel free to leave comments, criticisms, any sort of ideas you have for future videos in the comments below. I appreciate you all's feedback. Have a good day, evening, or whatever time it is for you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hey guys, I just wanted to reiterate really fast how important it is that you leave feedback for me. I really appreciate your feedback. I mean, I'm doing these videos for you all, pretty much. So if you have any suggestions for future videos or anything like that, or comments, criticisms, anything, please leave it in the comments. Please subscribe, and please share these videos around. I really appreciate y'all's support. Thanks. Peace out.